Everybody, how we doing?
Oh, sorry.
Nope, couldn't hear you. How we doing? Yeah, that's better. We've got the graveyard shifts. We have to keep you awake. And in order to keep you awake, we've come out here to talk about payments, which is the opposite of keeping you awake. But we're going to try and make it really interesting for you, because we're going to talk about the future of mobile payments. And the future is always interesting, right? So what we want to do first is just frame the conversation a little bit. You've heard a little bit about the backgrounds of my wonderful guests here today. For my sins, I have been analysing the entire marketing technology space for the last 3 years. I'm also a journalist with VentureBeat covering that space, and that includes things like mobile payments and the future of payment. But you don't want to hear too much from me. You want to hear from our experts. So just going around a little bit, explain for us, Roelant, starting with you, who you are, what you're doing, and what is your personal interest in the payment space?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Roelant Prins, a Dutch guy, and I work for Adyen. We are a global payments business. I'm based out of Amsterdam. And if you look at what we do, I think most of you here come across Adyen without knowing in many situations. So if you buy something on Spotify, or you take an Uber from the airport, you're buying a Netflix subscription, or let's say you're buying an EasyJet ticket, all those transactions need a payment, and payments are what we do. So we're behind these type of companies, taking all the hassle away from making the transaction go through. And my role is responsibility for the commercial side of the company globally.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Roelant. Jeppe?
Yeah, so I work for Northzone. It's a Nordic venture capital firm. We focus on not only the Nordics, but also very much these days in Berlin, and we have offices in London and New York. In terms of payment space, it's a space we've invested in for quite a while. Currently, we have companies like Klarna and iSettle, and more recently, All Unite in our portfolio. What we like and what we really look for at the moment is moving from a functional payment side to how it's relevant in people's lives. So most people don't actually care per se about money, they care about what they do with it. Same way with the businesses. So you look at the customer interaction point, saying, what can I use this payment for? How can I make it relevant to me on both sides? And that we still find interesting from an innovation perspective.
Perfect, thanks. And Aage?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Aage. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Wrapp. And as they said before, I'm not involved in 10 companies at the same time. I've been in 10 startups in total, but I run them usually one by one. It makes it simpler. And Wrapp is a service we have been running it for 5 years, but we have done a very large pivot because our aim was from the day one to create performance-based marketing for mainly offline retail. They still have a lack of tools actually to do performance-based marketing, and we think we can do that. And now we have created this new solution with Wrapp, where we integrate with banks on top of the payment systems to build a personal profile for me as a user. And with my personal profile, I can leverage on that versus the retailer and enhance and enrich the relationship between me and the places I shop at, from the big retailers to the local restaurant.
Perfect, excellent. I mean, it's actually quite a nice segue into my first question, because I used to use Wrapp. Facebook would tell me it's your birthday, and of course I only celebrate your birthday if Facebook tells me it's your birthday. I don't remember everyone's birthdays. And I used to use Wrapp to send a $10 Starbucks card to my American friends for their birthday. You pivoted away from that, but I used to choose Starbucks specifically because I like them. I like the coffee. And Starbucks is really the gold standard now when we think of the way that retailers have started to come into and usurp the banking role. Starbucks at this point, they now have 25% of their purchases going through their mobile app. And 7% of that is order in advance. In some really high position stores, up to 20% of their purchases are order in advance through the mobile app. It's really been transformative as far as their business is concerned. What is the role of banks now when retailers like Starbucks and others are building their own platforms and enabling those kinds of consumer to business, but also peer-to-peer transactions that are going on?
Yeah, what is the role of banks? I think there is a big need for driving much more convenience for customers. And the Starbucks example is, of course, world class. But there's many other examples. I think another example that comes up a lot is the Uber example. Recurring is a new business model, which is all over the place with, not only digital services, but a lot of retail models. And everybody, we work a lot with these companies, and everybody is looking at how can we make it more convenient for people to buy our products or services and pay for them. And I think traditionally, the banking infrastructure out there hasn't done anything for merchants to come up with these type of convenience-driven solutions. I think the payments world has been, standing still for decades, and now suddenly a lot of new players are coming in that are really using technology to change this. And it's hard for legacy players to try and find out what their role is, because it's a completely different approach. So I think there's lots more change coming, because every retailer is thinking about how can we apply these type of seamless customer journeys in our model, and it's coming.
Do you think that's right? Do you agree? Do you guys?
No, I think it's a very interesting debate, because I think, listen, the banks, I keep hearing this, the banks are going to go away, they no longer have a role to play. Headlines is always about banks not doing well. Let's not forget that even Deutsche Bank still has 5 billion in profits every year. They may have to pay to the United States 14 billion in a fine, but nonetheless, it's a billion. So what they're not good at, what they're really weak at, because they haven't had to do anything about it for so many decades, or even longer than that, are service. They are just rubbish at service. So what we've seen by and large, and Adyen is different, I think, in that category, but what we've seen by and large is most of the innovation is happening at the service layer at the moment. And I think that is just starting. I think the banks still have a very big role to play behind the service. And certainly we've seen in the last 9 months has had a massive change. Whereas the banks beforehand send out the head of strategy, head of innovation to us. Now they're sending out, head of credit, head of this department, P&L, this and that. They're actually looking for partnerships and real deals. And multiple of our companies are now doing it. If you take iSettle as an example, iSettle wouldn't be the big success it is today if it hadn't done distribution partnerships with banks and other players. So I think they have a big role to play. I don't think it's going to go away.
You talk about customer service there, and I remember a study by Points recently. Of course, they've got a vested interest in the study, what with them being a wallet service with loyalty points. But it was 1,500 consumers, so it was statistically significant, and it also lined up with some other studies that I've read. Almost all consumers, I think it was 94%, said that they would be more likely to use these new payment technologies if there was an automated loyalty system built into it whereby they can earn something back. How important is loyalty in terms of driving payments and getting people to use this technology?
Loyalty is a big word in itself, because you have a lot of factors within it. But definitely, just before we step into that, I just want to we have to cut out the payment itself, because with technology you do right now as well, every earnings on payments goes down. The regulation kicks in, everything makes the actual payment being cheaper and cheaper. So then you have to add things on top of it. And the service layers or services on top of it is the things that makes me tick as a user as well. And within that space, then of course loyalty comes into play, and whatever you can do to enrich the engagement between the user and the retailer. So I think that will play a much more important role. But all the existing loyalty, most of them have been based upon interchange fees. And when that goes away, then all the loyalty programs, as they are from before, need to find their new role. And that's where we come in. We have a completely new model for it, but that's just one player. There are others out there as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what do you think, Roelant?
I think there's somehow, if you link loyalty to payment, they seem to be a bit separated in terms of what drives people and what they want to use. I think if you look at payment, people just want to buy a service and a product, and how they pay for it, in the end, the easier the better. but trust is a big thing, right? So I think from a consumer point of view, trust is key in payment. And that's why in countries like the Netherlands, where I'm from, or in Germany, people almost never use their credit card because they think, oh, that's credit, that's a bad thing. We use other means of payment. I think if you look at loyalty and offering loyalty to customers, it's for a lot of retailers, it's a key thing to almost differentiate and provide an added value. You know, if you look at media products, electronics, those sort of products, people are going in store, look at their mobile, and they're going to buy it where it's the cheapest, and that's it. I mean, it's moving so quickly, and I think loyalty is a way to add a value, build a relationship, because that's the real challenge these retailers have. It's around, how do I differentiate? What am I going to offer to a consumer, why they want to engage with me? It's got to be either super convenience or it's a better product somehow, but nothing else.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because loyalty speaks to trust. The other thing that we have to trust in is with retailers and with banks, they're all collecting huge amounts of data on every single consumer at this point. And a lot more than most people would expect because of the prevalence of the smartphone and because of some very clever attribution technology. We can understand just how much in terms of the payments world is being influenced by mobile devices. In 2016, $500 billion of purchases in the United States will be influenced by the mobile, by people using it for research, and 140 billion of that is going to be direct m-commerce sales, people buying things directly on the mobile. It brings into question the security element because there's no point in building all that trust if all of that data and information is A, not secure, and B, not being used properly. You know, at the point where somebody uses that data for the wrong means, it's going to erode that trust instantaneously and harm the entire payments organization. How are we going to deal with the security of all of that data?
So I think we've been fighting a losing war for quite a few years now, where it was all about, oh, this company has now been breached and your customer data is out there and they now have your name, your address, they may even have some bank account details. I think we're going to have to get used to that is out there and it will be out there. I think most young people have grown up, it's second nature to them to have it out there anyway. So the question becomes, how do we set up a security system that works for it once you're out there? And I see a lot of innovation coming through. One of the things that we are excited about is instead of thinking about perimeters, is thinking about what you do. Can you apply security as you do it? And there are things like you can follow whether you tap on a keyboard in a certain way. There are things obviously on the voice side, there's on the behavior side. There are many different ways. The difficulty currently is most big corporates think this is the nightmare on earth. This is how are they ever going to roll this out? So therefore, it's going to be small companies starting off.
Aage, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think once again we have to separate the payment systems from itself because I think most people, at least in this part of the world, think that using a card is a pretty safe or perceived safe to do. You pull in your card in the machine, you do your chip and pin thing, and you're done. If you then add that into Uber and using your service in the bottom, you think that is safe. Then it comes to the trust of Uber. And of course, that took some time to build that trust, but when enough people have started using that service, they continue. And the payment just goes on. And I'm a very heavy Uber user myself. We actually launched Uber through Wrapp in Sweden, so it was a successful launch, but that's a different story. But then, so the trust thing is more about the services on top, I should say. And for us as a new player now, or a pivoted new player at least, of course we have to gain that trust again, but I don't think it's an issue around the payment transaction in the bottom. It's more about how we operate and manage our data. In our case, we are extremely transparent that this service is for you, and it's for me, and we use your data in the best benefit of you, or best interest of you. That's the core of it. If you don't trust us, then you don't use us.
And that level of trust is interesting because you pointed out something. I did a study ages ago about how people complain on social media.
Yeah.
And overwhelmingly, people were complaining about Facebook. It was like 80% of them were complaining about Facebook. But actually, it turned out they weren't complaining about Facebook. They were complaining about Zynga because Farmville wasn't working.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to what you just said. You know, where does the blame lie when there's a breach? Does it sit with the bank or does it sit with the service? You know, with your solution, you're connecting to 250 different payment methods, probably more. You know, how do we secure and unify those transactions and create that full level of trust and make sure that we deal with it in the most effective manner?
I see a few things going on. So on the one hand, there is more and more regulatory pressure on companies around security, really pushing a lot of them to outsource a lot of this stuff to specialized companies. The second thing going on is there's change in the payment methods themselves. An example is EMV, so chip and PIN is now in the US, and it's actually out there.
Sort of.
More and more.
Very slow, very slow.
So there's a lot of change happening. But I think with trust is a really interesting psychological thing, because going back to the example in the Netherlands where we have this internet banking-based payment method called Ideal, which is run by the banks, and there's a lot of similar methods across Europe. In the customer perception, it's the ideal payment methods. Like 70% of all payments in Holland go through this method. From a consumer point of view, if you pay with a credit card and the company where you're buying goes bankrupt, they don't deliver the product to you, with a credit card you can reverse the transaction and you're fine. You're really well protected. In Holland we say, credit card, I don't want to use that. We use Ideal. That's what we know, that's secure. If the company goes bankrupt and doesn't deliver to me, the money's gone.
Right.
So it's what people are used to is really hard to change.
But I think that's an important point, because so we have a company called Trustpilot, and it basically, if you've seen the stars, it's this you know, you get a review out of 5 stars, and what we're finding is people are getting really sophisticated in how they trust people, and it's a social notion. It's about, you know, initially you will trust a review on whatever it is. Now it's like you will trust people from Holland because you're Dutch. Suddenly you will say, I don't trust Amsterdam people as much as I trust Rotterdam. Or, you know, people that do a certain, that know somebody I know. And I think within payments world, we're going to see some of the same stuff where we're going to say, is this a risky transaction because it's completely new with 2 strangers? Or is it a recurrent? You probably already know it from your mobile banking transaction. If you already have paid somebody, you obviously have much lower barriers in what you can do on the payment side versus if you've done it before. And I think you will find that that's leveraged in your network. So that notion is one, certainly I believe, is going to come through.
I mean, we can't talk about trust and security without bringing up everyone's favorite topic of the moment, blockchain, and how it might affect payments.
I so thought you were going to say Trump. Thank you.
Well, let's just say that blockchain might have avoided the Trump issue if we were using it for voting systems, maybe. But of course, you know, blockchain could affect everything. For everybody here, you may be experts in blockchain, you may know nothing about it. Just let's try and paint a little picture of what blockchain might mean for the payments industry. So, are you?
I think you should start with the Dutch guy here. I think he knows most about it.
We are, as a company, always very focused on what's relevant for merchants and consumers today and in the next few years. So looking at payment methods and looking at behavior and how that changes and introducing new payment types, we've learned over the past 10 years, 15 years that it's really, really difficult to introduce new payment methods, because it means a lot of merchants need to accept it, a lot of consumers need to trust it, wanting to use it, very much chicken and egg, and almost never it works well. I think blockchain, longer term in terms of authentication, has massive promise. But from a payment method, we've done quite some experimentation with it. Right now, it's not something that's driving a lot of transactions, to be honest.
I agree on that. You will probably see that kind of technology first go into voting system and stuff like that before entering into the mass market of payments. It's a long travel.
So for me, it's back to the what you said about loyalty payments. I can't remember the name of them, a German company just recently, And this is they were focused on whenever you have a credit from a company, whether it's your airline, because Finnair didn't fly in yesterday morning, for those of you that made it here, you get a credit. And people no longer prefer cash back. They actually would prefer to get a credit so you can buy something else. Currently, you may not want it just in Finnair currency, but you want it so you can apply it through any retailer. So I can see that notion coming through, that it will be morphed into a form of cyber currency, which eventually will find its way to the logic of something like a blockchain type scenario.
I mean, the potential premise of blockchain is not that it makes everything faster or smoother, but it completely does away with everything that we understand. It gets rid of banks and PSPs and credit card companies and makes them all redundant. The banks, of course, are worried about this. They're starting to think about whether we should get rid of geographic currencies and have bank currencies. So you would have, a Chase dollar. You might have a Trump dollar. A Trump dollar would be $1, but they would shout really loudly at you that it's actually worth $5 until you believe it. Is that the way that blockchain will go? If it's so disruptive, are the banks going to be so scared that they'll actually try and control it through their own currency systems? Or?
Look at how much cash there's still out there, and the change, it's going to take a very, very, very long time.
It's a two-generational shift.
I just don't think the general public cares enough. I really don't think. I think it's a brilliant, interesting academic concept, and it makes a lot of sense to me, and I don't want, personally, central bank to run my lives in government. But I think, generally speaking, I just don't think people care too much. What they care more about is whether you can trust the euro because it goes up and down, rather than why it goes up and down.
Yeah. So we've got maybe just a couple of minutes left. What I'd like to do is just go around and, in terms of the future of retail payments, and think about just how prevalent the smartphone is and how important the smartphone is to our daily lives. Especially as we're in this world of the never satisfied, always mobile consumer, the people that wake up on average and check social media in 22 seconds of waking up and then go down the store and pay with their smartphone and do everything with their smartphone. What is the one future payments technology that you think is going to make the biggest difference in the short term? Because obviously blockchain is going to be 1 or 2 generations before it comes in. What's the short-term future for payments?
I think it's actually what you guys are doing at Adyen and others, because when the pricing is going down on everything regarding payment, it's all about the small fixes to make that happen. And in the end, I don't think that, as you said, the consumer care that much, because the payment is just to be processed and it's done. But it's more of what's going to happen on top of it. Lending money in a more efficient ways, sending money abroad in more efficient ways, and of course when it comes to loyalty and other stuff on top of that. So it's all about the services around it. Uber is a very good example as well, and something that simplified one step further. You didn't have to pull your card in the taxi, you just stepped out. That's it. It's a very good, simple, small example of how people can change in behavior.
Perfect. Jeppe?
Yeah, for me it's about the point of sale becomes even more important rather than less important, but it doesn't become more important because of the transaction, i.e. the money transfer. It becomes more important because it becomes the focal point of the customer doing something with a service provider. And by that, I think your example is right there. I can see it in many other examples as well. I think we are currently living increasingly within integrated clubs where I have my world I live and shop in, and whatever I spend in it, I want to be able to apply throughout. I think we're going to see that being rolled out very fast.
Excellent. And quickly, Roelant?
Yeah, so we talk a lot with retailers across the globe, and I think the key thing for them is around omni-channel. Really, consumers, whether they're here in Helsinki or they're in London or New York, they want to be treated equally consistent. They just want to have a seamless experience. And from our point of view, what's really interesting is how payments fits into that. To give people a seamless experience, whether they're paying on a mobile here or they're buying online there. The fact that they can return something wherever they want, pick up products wherever they want, needs a unified payment solution. And that's really the interesting piece where we're working on.
Could I sum up that? I think what you're going to see is less payment methods, but more seamless experiences in the end.
So there you go. The answer, everyone, is outrageously good customer service and omni-channel. Thank you very much to Roelant and Jeppe and Aage. Please give them a huge round of applause. My name's been Stewart Rogers for Benchboot. Thank you.
Thanks.